Hi, everyone. Jackson Fisk with Goal Zero. Welcome to another episode of 0 Hour. So, 0 Hour being the time that we make a decision to move forward. We have a talk show with business owners, industry leaders, and pretty much everything or anyone we want to pass their wisdom on to you. They're going to share their stories, their experiences, and hope that we could take something away to better our business or professional lives. So, my guest today is Geoff Bykes. Geoff is driven both in life and business. He's worked a dozen plus years in disability management, working with WCB short-term, long-term disability claims. Geoff lives by three principles. One, the best business leaders build better teams, families, and their bottom line through honesty, transparency, and vulnerability. Two, that social responsibility is a key component of any business, and it needs to translate through the clients, vendors, and employees they work with. And three, that work-life balance is a requirement, not an option. Working in the disability management and workers' compensation space for employers for the past 10 years plus, he brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to any type of disability concern employers may have. And everyone likes talking about disability management. So with that, let's get to it. How's it going, Geoff?
Good. Yourself?
Not too bad, man. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me on today, Jackson.
Yeah, no problem. So the big fun world of disability and claims management.
Very few people call it fun, but it is certainly big and interesting.
Yeah, well, I think in most industries, depending, okay, oil and gas, there's a completely different standard than a mom and pop shop of what they look at when it comes to disability management, right? It's, I don't want to say two extremes. One doesn't care, one cares too much, and they want to hide things, or they try to fudge data depending on the severity of it. And it's something that I don't think a lot of employers talk about, or at least educate themselves on until they have an incident they have to deal with it. I don't know. That's my personal opinion.
I would say construction's in there too. They all have their health and safety programs, but they really struggle translating documentation and protocol into actually managing a person who's off work due to injury.
Yeah.
It's a very different skill set, and the same people often manage both, and that's not always a good fit.
Yeah, I agree. Well, this is like when we say safety people do HR and HR people do safety.
Yeah.
Depends on who you talk to. Some are really good at doing both. Most of us know our skill set.
Yep.
So, when I look at disability management, I have to look back at a lot of stories that I've hurt myself. I've been an employer, or I've been a supervisor, I've been an employer, and then I've been the manager that has to deal with those claims. And all of them are a different mindset. And, I look back at hurting myself at work and not wanting to report it because I thought I was going to get in trouble and not have a job. Right? Or as a supervisor, getting frustrated because someone got hurt. Right? And you're like,
yep.
Okay, what did you do? Why did you screw up? And not thinking about the human component. And then being a safety manager and going, okay, is this, how do we take care of this person? How do we get them back to work? How do we, rehabilitate them properly? Or you get a really bad claim and you go, this person's screwing the system and it's going to screw our stats and we're not going to be able to go to work. So there's a lot of different emotions around that, depending on what type of business or what part of the business you're in as well. So, give us a background. Like, how did you fall into this industry?
Well, I can give you my story for sure. So I've actually been in the disability management space since I was 5 years old. So actually my parents founded a disability management firm back then. It was a home-based business, and I was helping with photocopying and IT when I was age 5. which I still tell them I was never paid for properly. So child slave labor in the beginning.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like employment standards, I think there's some rules on that, but
yeah, there are. So, I mean, I grew up with disability management around the house. It was conversation at the dinner table. Both my parents were involved. My father came from WCB. My mom came from the insurance side on short-term disability. So when they launched CompCall, it grew from the basement of our family home into an office space in sort of the early 2000s. And it was always around growing up. And I got to tell you, I hated every second of it. I didn't want to hear about disability management. It did all these important things, but it was always there. So as a kid, of course, I didn't like it. So when I left home, I graduated, I got my BCom, and I ran my own business for 6 or 7 years. And once that business was winding down, CompCall, which is the firm I'm working with now, they were looking to have some new talent come on board, eventually a transition of power. My parents were eventually looking to retire. So in 2012, I joined CompCall. And since I joined, we had tripled the revenue. But more importantly, we really started changing our philosophy to, it's not about the day-to-day little claims. It's about understanding the people behind the injuries. And those are what you have to treat to get people back. And that's when I really found my own. I loved the puzzles of finding out what barrier was preventing this person from getting their best recovery and coming back. And that's what I continue to push today. So it's one of our favorite things. It's not about the person who has a disability. That's what matters. It's not the injury. It's the person that you're treating. Yes, two people might both have knee strains, but if they're entirely different backgrounds in their own lives, you have to treat them differently. And a lot of the firms have protocols and procedures in place which handle the basic injuries, but they cannot adapt to the difficult people or difficult situations or the difficult injuries that occur. And that's where we come in. So that's kind of the background of where I come from, my interest and passion in it.
That's fair. And it's funny because we talk about, you mentioned people management. It's not really injury management. There's systems, there's processes. WCB has a whole medical team to help you with injury management.
Yeah.
Right. But it's dealing with that individual person. Now, when companies, what do I say this? When we look at disability management within a company, it's usually a blanket policy, right? Everyone kind of has something similar. It changes year to year to what WCB wants it to say, right?
Yep.
Depending on
policies change.
Yeah, depending on what the policy is of the government at the time, and it kind of comes into this cog of a machine. And I look back. I had bilateral carpal tunnel surgery, and it was funny because I remember when I had that claim, my doctor went, "This is work related. Don't go to work." I went, "Well, I'm gonna do that because I need to get paid, right?"
Yeah.
And so I kept working, and eventually, I almost had an incident because I couldn't move my hands. I couldn't move my hands, so I went down and grounded myself from my trade. And at that time, WCB fought tooth and nail to not cover my claim.
Yeah.
Right. They tried to make every excuse whatsoever. They're like, "Oh, well, you broke your wrist when you were 5. And that's why you have carpal tunnel." I'm like, I don't think so. Right. Here's all my specialist papers saying that that's not true. And, so it was just this nightmare to deal with. Finally, it was accepted by industry. And, then you get pushed through this system. And at the time, I remember my care team going, "Hey, are you sure?" We're doing grip strength tests. And I'm like, "Ow, this hurts." And they'd be like, "Maybe you shouldn't squeeze it that hard." Right? Not picking up on the cue that they're trying to tell me. Yeah, don't do that, because once you hit a threshold, we're just going to release you. Right? And that was kind of it. They're like, "Okay, yeah, you're cleared." Yeah. And I remember going through and I'm like, what do you mean I'm cleared? This still hurts. I can't really grip things. And they're like, "Well, you've hit the threshold, so you can go back to work.
Go back to full duties. You hit what you had to hit."
Yeah. And I was like, wow, okay. And no one ever really thought, or I guess they tried, but even the companies I worked with, no one thought any more past that.
Yeah.
Right. It was just like, okay, yeah, you're good. Thank you. Off the books. Right. And so, talking about individual people and their, that type of care really comes into the way legislation's changing now. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And caring for employees and, psychological, social well-being and stress and anxiety and all this stuff really has to be considered when we're looking at claims management. So when I guess, how does a company kind of approach and engage someone like you and your services? Because, most people might not know they exist.
It's actually a very real problem for us is we're so niche, people don't know specialists like us exist. I would actually start by, I want to lay this out because it's always very easy when I have chats to think of WCB as a big bad beast. WCB is a critical component. It fills a need, but it needs management. It's in many ways, it's like an insurance company. Insurance is required for so many different things, just like WCB is. But for everyone who's ever put in a claim for car insurance, it never goes the way you want it to. And WCB is the same way, except way more expensive.
Yeah.
So in order to engage someone like us, it's a conversation. A lot of what we do isn't day-to-day claims management. It's educating employers on what their responsibilities are and what their rights are. We struggle with WCB educating them on what the rights of the employee are, but not on what their own rights are. And so employers get overwhelmed. They're being told by WCB that they're in the right treatment. They can't work yet. We have to wait 6 weeks until the next assessment. If you have a chat with someone like us, we can say, well, hold on. Yes, these things are happening. Yes, they're in treatment, but is it the right treatment? Well, all this medical research says no. All this literature says no. And why are they completely off work for a soft tissue injury when you have sedentary duties on a part-time basis available? That's what employers really struggle with. How they often don't think people are so disabled they can't come into work for a few hours a day of sedentary work. And they really struggle with this. So we can have a look at the file, have the conversation. We cannot solve everything. There are some claims, they need time off, they need treatment, they need all these things to get them better, and we can help them get those. But we educate the employers so they understand what's actually going on, and they feel like they've been heard, they understand the process, and there's a plan moving forward. They may not like that it's going to take 6 or 8 weeks for that plan, but we've told them why, we've educated them on the policy, and they have a reasonable expectation now. It's about education. Employers, we feel, get so mad about WCB because they don't understand what WCB is doing. And to be fair, sometimes we don't understand what WCB is doing because they're not doing anything by policy, but that's a little more rare.
And that's fair. And, we look at the last couple of years and everyone, the years that we shall not name, right? We had a 2-year break in life. But trying to I remember going through like certain claims with employers. You couldn't even get a hold of someone.
No.
Right?
It was pretty bad. Yeah, they transitioned to work from home pretty quickly. But a really good example in Alberta is the cost transfer department. They're the ones that handle, okay, you're on site, but your employee got hurt, but it wasn't your company's fault. So you can try to put costs on another company. Well, that department just shut down over COVID. They just stopped working because the system they had to access the files to process it, they couldn't do remotely. Yeah. So we now have files in the cost transfer queue that have been in there pre-COVID that are still not answered. So there were some hiccups over it. That was probably the longest one in Alberta.
And then isn't don't you only have 12 months to dispute claims?
You have a 1-year appeal, but if the decision's never been made because it's taken them 4 years to do it, the 1 year doesn't start until that decision's made.
Okay, perfect. Okay, because that's always that'd be an awesome scapegoat. It's like, sorry, it's been over 12 months. We can't really appeal that now.
No, I'm almost up to 3 years now. Actually, we just hit 3 years because it was in March of 2020 got filed. So yeah, we have 3 years now on a cost transfer.
Wow.
No decision yet, and no timeline either. So a lot of other departments struggled, like everyone did, transitioning, but overall hasn't been too bad. Our biggest hiccup was, you'll remember the big government change from blue to orange and back to blue over the last 6 years.
Yep.
When the NDP came in, they did something called Bill 30, which from a health and safety standpoint, you know all about.
Oh, yeah.
From a WCB standpoint, it revolutionized WCB in a way that we were not expecting and is not run this way in any other province in the country. So they made some sweeping changes, which there's a lot of long-term staff at WCB which were very unhappy with the changes. So they were leaving. Then the UCP got in and wiped out most of those changes. So now we've lost a bunch of veterans, and the people they hired to train under the new policies that liked them are now losing those policies. So they're unhappy. So there is massive turnover. And we have been told that WCB has been told internally to look for any reason to accept a claim. They'll never publish it, they'll never admit it, but that's the internal guideline we've heard from multiple case managers, is if there's any way to accept a claim, accept it.
Wow.
So that's a big change for us in Alberta.
Yep, that's huge. And let's dissect that for a second. Like, from an employer standpoint, and there's a lot of people that, again, depending on your industry, it's good and bad. And I want to think from a foundational aspect. Remember, it's good that we care about employees and we want to take care of them.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's the foundation of it. You go, hey, you shouldn't get hurt at work. Okay. And if you are hurt at work, you should get better and we should take care of you. And, we should give you the means to be able to get back to some sort of normal life.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's anyone, I can't say that, but, I don't think there's many people that don't think that's a good premise. The problem is now when it starts to affect insurance premiums, costs, and your ability for a company to get work. And that's where this huge, I think, disconnect is between the theory of what we're trying to offer and then the implications onto business, right? And, again, it comes down to conversations, but we've worked with some small employers or smaller employers, and, you get a lost time claim that goes, or a claim that lasts a significant amount. And, then their premium rate is in a surcharge, their TRIF is out out to lunch, and they can't bid on work.
Yeah.
And you go, it's not fair for that employer because they actually cared. They want to take care of them. They've done all this stuff, right? They care about that worker. They want to get them back to work. But now there's this huge black mark on their business record that's now affecting them to move forward in business.
Yeah.
And, I don't think any of us will have that answer on how to fix that, because you have to look at all these big industry leaders and kind of change the way those metrics work. Right.
This is a real problem. Like construction, we mentioned, and oil and gas as well. I have a really great little story about a construction client. You were talking about the cost and the bidding on work and how it can affect all of that. Well, WCB has they do have mechanics in place to remove costs, but they have no mechanics in place to remove time loss, even if it's not the employer's fault. In some ways, there's time loss.
Yeah.
So we had a client in construction. A gentleman suffered a knee strain, and the knee strain was quite minor, but he had some pre-existing issues. So it turned into a need for a total knee replacement about a year later. Serious injury, and the employer was really good, and so was the employee, actually. They really cooperated well, lots of modified. But you don't go back to being a truck driver in a construction company with a fake knee right after surgery. You need some time off.
Yeah.
And that's very reasonable, and there were no contention there. The problem was, even though due to cost relief, the employer didn't have to pay all those premiums, all those time loss days were still on their record. So through no fault of their own, and in some ways, employers view it as, well, I'm trying to work with my older employees who might have pre-existing. Why am I being penalized?
Yeah.
Now this employer had almost 100 days of time loss on their record, And I mean, you never know all the stats, but they're telling me that they lost a major contract because it put their time lost days to hours worked ratio too high.
Yep.
Because of something completely not their fault.
Yep.
WCB didn't do anything wrong. The employer didn't do anything wrong, and the employee didn't do anything wrong, but it still cost an employer that contract.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the horrible part, because now we go into culture of a business.
Yeah.
And, they might have had the best safety culture, ever, because they care about their worker, they do everything right. But if they start losing work from it now, that's going to start shifting, right? Whether it's subconscious or not, right? Like, I don't think someone just comes out militantly and being like, okay, now F all of this stuff, we're not doing it, or we're not going to report it. But it's slowly going to start to weigh on management, owners, all this stuff, because they go, hey, if this keeps happening, none of us have jobs.
Yeah.
Right. And this comes back to, I think, that education piece, but even having these kind of open conversations. And if you can have them with industry and WCB, and if they could all get along, that would be nice.
Yeah.
But it comes, like, from my perspective for health and safety, then it still comes into that preventative aspect. Okay. Yeah. What are we doing now? Okay. We have policies, procedures, programs, all of this stuff in place because we're supposed to go to work. But now let's actually look at that and how effective it is. And are we trying to be proactive? Are we actually trying to implement these things? Are we trying to look at all of these kind of factors before something bad happens? And that comes into a bigger realm of just having an HR manager, a safety manager, God forbid, your poor administrator that you've tasked to do all these things.
The payroll person has I've seen so many WCB claims filed by payroll because they do the paperwork, but they have no other training beyond that.
Well, and that's it. That kind of comes back to the previous conversation, or the comment on, a lot of people don't understand it until they get hit with it.
Yeah.
And most HR managers, most safety managers, it's still trial by fire. I don't care what education you've had. You understand it in theory until you have applied knowledge and have actually dealt with the ins and outs of it.
Yeah.
You're probably not proficient at it. You might have filed an employer's report. You might have said, yep, we got modified duties. And then that's kind of it, right? Like, okay, to be fair, a lot of times you can just get away with that, and that's effective. And
yeah, we think about 80% of the claims can be handled that way because that's all they need. Everyone cooperates and it's easy enough. It's the 20% that costs 95% of your premiums.
Yep. And this is, a prime example. How many times do you get an employer call and go, yeah, my worker just didn't show up today. What do I do?
All the time.
Yep. I think we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago about that.
Yep. All the time. And employers can do so. I think that's probably the biggest frustration my employers have is the onus is so much so on the employer in this process, not the employee.
Yeah.
So the common examples we always hear, the employee doesn't report an injury for 2 weeks because they think it was minor. Then they see a doctor. The doctor said this WCB. The worker never told the employer, so the employer didn't have a chance to offer modified work. So the doctor takes them off work.
Yep.
Well, and nowhere in that is it really the worker's or the employer's fault, but the worker should have told the employer.
Yeah.
So now the employer is on the hook for time loss, even if it's only 3 days while they get paperwork sorted. And that is 100% on the employer's account. Those time loss days can't be removed and the employee is never penalized. And that is a struggle. That's a huge part of my education is employers have to do everything in the beginning.
Yep.
Yeah, lots of employees are great people. They cooperate. They're good to work with. But employers have to train their staff to do everything. In my education seminars for clients, if someone's not at work, you need to get written communication as to why. It can be a text message, something. You need them telling you in writing they're not off for work related. If they're off with a cold, they can tell you it's a cold. Great. But you have to ask. Otherwise, they come back 5 days later. Oh, yeah, but I tweaked my back at work. My doctor said take a few days off, and I'm good to go now. 5 days of time loss, and you're not going to win that.
No. And the worst is, again, education. I remember growing up in a union work environment. That was the first thing they told us. It's like, look, if you just need time off, you don't call in hurt. Right? Like,
Yeah.
call in drunk. We can deal with that.
But not hurt.
Not hurt, right? And
Yeah.
you're like, oh, okay. I drank too much. I'm not coming in, even though my back hurts and I just want to lay down. You know,
well, as someone who worked construction when I was 19, and I should have called in still hungover once or twice and didn't. It really should just call it in because you get hurt.
Yeah, well, yeah. One thing leads to another. You're kind of messed up anyway. But that whole mindset also comes back into a bigger problem. Why did I get that drunk that night? Was it because I was 19, or was it because I was also just hating my job? Right? And that was how we deal with stress, and we blow it off and go, okay. Also not healthy. And coming back into, claims management, but culture of our business. So this is where I wish companies, and I probably say this every time I talk to somebody, I wish there was required education for people who start a business, right? Like, there's a lot of education out there, but you should, if you go to incorporate a business or you go to start something up, they should be like, hey, what are you doing? Cool. Here's all the stuff you need to know.
Wouldn't that be fantastic? Or one book that has a chapter on WCB and insurance and bylaws for your corporate structure and all the things you need to know before you get going?
Yeah, it would be awesome. Again, no one's going to read it. Like, I look back at like my first consultancy. Would I have read that book? No. Like, you can only do so much. Does WCB have training available to employers?
They do. They have a couple seminars they offer. They have one on the appeal process, sort of some of the basic ones. They have some good basic information in them, but again, they really only apply to those 80% of claims that are pretty straightforward and basic and most people can handle without any issues. Yeah. So I specialize in the more complex ones. One file might spend 30 hours on one file over 3 months. Like, they can be very time consuming. Yeah. There is no education available by WCB that I've ever seen that covers what they need to know about all of the intricacies of that. There are some other educations available, like even Grant McEwen has a disability management program. Port Alberni, BC has a great full disability management program. There are some options, but not by WCB. And WCB case managers aren't trained on costs. So when they're managing your file, they don't understand that by following the steps, it's steps 4, 5, 6 of the adjudication process. If treatment is not working, do an MSE FCE, which is a medical status exam or functional capacity exam. That's just their procedure. If this isn't working, do this. Well, this costs $1,000. For most employers, that's $3,000 to $4,000 in premium. Yeah. And the majority of claims is completely unnecessary. But employers don't understand that, nor do the case managers, because they're not trained, not on that. So that's something that we can really step in to help manage. Okay. Because we do appeals, we feel the claim file copies, which have the invoices that show what WCB services cost. It's a lot. Well, and this is, anytime you have an insurance or anytime you have, we'll just use insurance. It doesn't matter if it's a car. Yeah. If you take it to the body shop yourself, it's going to be 1/3 of the price than your insurance company doing the work. Yep, absolutely. Right? So, understanding this as well. And, the amount of people that, and again, it's been hit and miss, but occupational injury services clinics, OIS clinics. Yeah. If you're an employer, you have to sign up for this. And I think this is where people get lost too, right? You might have a WCB account here in Alberta. Check your local jurisdictions. I don't know if every jurisdiction has the same type of service, but I'm sure they have similar. Working with an actual medical facility that at least understands basic claims management can save you a ton. Yeah. The amount of people, so we have doctor-patient confidentiality, right? If I take an injured worker to a doctor, I don't get to go in with them. Right? Like, you stay there. Okay, cool.
then that worker gets to tell them whatever they want. And they usually come out with a note that says, worker's going to be off for 2 weeks. And that's all you get.
So actually, I'll jump in there a little bit, because you're right. I see lots of that too, but it's not, I don't believe it's the workers telling the doctors that I can't work.
Yeah, fair
I
enough.
believe it's the workers either not understanding what modified work's available, which is very common because it's not discussed before the appointment. I think the best tip I could have for any employer is you can talk about modified duties before you take your worker to the doctor. You can talk about it, you can offer it. If the doctor says what you've discussed isn't suitable, the employee doesn't have to do it. But by setting that expectation before the worker goes in, you've avoided most of the problem. I want to go back. You made a really insightful comment earlier about how people, how to best paraphrase it, people inherently do want to work and have purpose. There's very few that truly want to collect money for nothing and sit at home perfectly healthy.
Yep.
That there's very, very few of those. The ones that employers think are doing that, something else has triggered them. So even like your example of the employer going into the appointment, I have seen files go terribly wrong after that because they felt the trust was betrayed.
Yep.
The employee doesn't want to work there anymore, and so they don't come back.
Yep.
That's not a WCB problem. That's a performance management employment relationship problem. And a lot of employers miss that, I think. Like most people want to work. They want to be there. They want to do their thing. They just want to be supported. Just because they have a knee strain, though, doesn't eliminate that they've had a supervisor who's been harassing and bullying them for the last 4 months and coworkers they hate. If they now have a reason to be off work, knee strain, because they hate their job, coworkers and supervisor, the employer blames WCB.
Yep.
It's not WCB's fault. It enables it, but it's not its fault. It is the employment relationship that was struggling before. And that's a lot of what I do too, is find out what's actually going on, solve that problem, and the injuries usually just solve themselves.
Well, and it's true. Like statistically speaking, if you can get gainful, meaningful employment and get an injured worker to feel like they're still contributing and they're still participating, the rehab time is way less.
Yeah.
Right? They get back to work faster. How many times, and I've seen it, I've been part of it. Oh, you're hurt, you're off. Okay, yeah, we got the note that you have to be off. No one talks to you for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Or a month, or no one's checked in on you. And you go, oh, okay, now you just feel like this lost person. You're not rehabbing, you're not taking care of yourself. Depression comes in because now you don't think you have a job. And like it just spirals and it can get so much worse.
Yeah.
And I think that education to workers is huge. Well, employers and workers.
And coworkers.
Yes.
Because it's not just the supervisors when they come back. If they've been off for 8 weeks, the rest of that injured employee's team has had to cover their work. And they will often feel taken advantage of because, oh, well, you could have come in. Like, there's no way you couldn't come and do paperwork a few hours. Like, what the heck? What are you doing? Yeah. And that has to be addressed because that just kills the work environment. Then the next person to go off knows they're coming back to that. And so they don't come back. They delay as long as they can.
Yeah, there's so many aspects when it comes to proper claims management and case management that, it really is a specialty. Right. Most employers, and I can't say this because I don't know 156,000 companies in this province. So this is a general term. Do basic education, right? Like first, understand what WCB is and your responsibilities.
Yeah.
Right. Like most people like, hey, you have 72 hours to do your employer's report. Well, what happens if I don't? Well,
they don't know or don't care. They have to educate their frontline staff too. It's not just the HR team, if they have one, which they often don't. It's all the people on the front line. So if you have, 20 teams working out there, they all have a lead hand or foreman with them. The lead hands and foremen have to know what to do when an injury happens or someone isn't at work. because there's no way the HR team or whoever's handling that can coordinate all those people missing or not at work. They have to train their people on their front line. And a lot of employers I work with haven't done that. And the difference they see in incident reporting times, all the other things, is tremendous, like such a huge impact.
Yeah. So, basic fundamentals of claims management.
Yeah.
Need to report.
Yeah, we can't do anything unless it's reported. There isn't much we can do.
Know that if your employee goes to the doctor and say it happens at work, even if they don't come back with a slip of paper, that physician has filed a report.
Yeah.
Right? So they're going to be contacting you at some point.
Might take 1 to 20 days, give or take, but at some point a report will show up.
Yeah. And, then try to, what's the process after that? Looking at modified work. And I've seen very effective modified work, and I've seen very, very cruel modified work.
Yeah.
I remember going to consult with a machine shop, and they had their modified duties bench. And it was a bench, and they just had this sign. They literally put the modified duties sign above it. And then the person's job was to paint the end of screw heads to color code them all day.
Getting a little non-meaningful work there.
Well, yeah, but they had their argument of the write-up of saying it's like, okay, this is what we're doing, and they had it justified to themselves.
Yep.
And you want to know how fast people get off modified work? I'm like, yeah, now creating a huge other problem. Now again, going into it, you go, that's hilarious on the surface.
On the surface.
Right?
Maybe if you have someone there for a day or two while you're preparing a more permanent modified job, a day or two, you still have to have them color coded. But weeks of it.
Yeah. When we could go like, hey, look, we have a paint booth, and you could just spray all of these and be done this whole tray.
That'd be far too efficient. You have to use the smallest paintbrush you can possibly find. You can't even dip them. You have to use the smallest paintbrush you can possibly find.
Yeah, exactly. So, thinking about what do you have for modified duties for your work scope, right? Lots of companies, if you're construction, manufacturing, oil and gas, trucking, right? What do you have if we have to take this person out of their trade and what they're doing, right? Have we actually put any thought into that, right? Most of it goes, well, you're going to file paperwork. Okay, not going to lie, there's usually multiple departments that are behind on all that stuff anyway that probably do need the help, right? But are we just making work for them?
And have you actually set up in advance so that the supervisor of the department who does have modified work, are they aware that they might be able to help someone in your department who needs it? Like, have you communicated that? We call them job jars. So when we work with employers, we have every department put together an actual physical jar, not a Google sheet, an actual physical jar, because it makes them do it.
Okay.
They write on pieces of paper what modified jobs exist. And the way we coach it is it needs to be work that has to happen, meaningful work. You would normally pay someone, but you just haven't had the time and or people to do it yet. Write it on that jar and put it in there, because when someone does get hurt, like a company email can go, hey, we need sedentary duties this day, this time. Open your jar, good to go. You're already ready to go, and you're constantly thinking about it. And it's a really easy tip to add.
Yeah, and it's a physical process that you're actually doing.
Yeah, you're not just typing in a sheet.
Yeah, we're putting it in a spreadsheet, and then we don't know where we actually put that spreadsheet.
Yeah. We have seen them being turned into swear jars every once in a while. Not jar jars, but
Yeah, okay. This is going to come in. I'll use this as the same as like WMIS labeling. Make sure that we label our container properly for what's inside the container.
Yeah.
Might not be a chemical, but let's get that label maker out.
Let's put something on there.
Yeah. I want to look at some stats, and I kind of mentioned to you about this. I'm going to see if I can present this. Share screen. So we have the 2021 annual report on the WCB website here for Alberta. Now, you were mentioning about, the actual like costs associated with this. And there's a drastic change kind of in the registered employers, and this is the first thing I look at from 2020 to 2021. 162,000, and that was actually a stat that I used to spout off a lot. Right? It was like, hey, there's 162,000 companies in Alberta. That was kind of the standard. And then in 2021, we're down to 156,000 companies. And do we look at the economic kind of impact of what that is, or did people find other jobs? I don't really know. But then we look at the lost time claim rate, and our disabling injury rate has actually went up.
So has the number of claims too by 15,000, which is very significant.
Yeah. Like, let's see, lost time claims up. Unfortunately,
4,000.
Yeah. Fatalities are up. And, I look at, let's not even look at the cost of what this cost industry or an employer or work, but what's it costing to the human component of our workers? And I've been hurt at work, and I've unfortunately been involved in some fatalities on work sites, not with my direct peers, or I can't say that my direct crews are the people I supervise. But, same work groups, same departments. If anyone has ever been involved in that type of accident or incident, depending on what definition you want to try to use, it's the worst thing I've ever been involved in.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if you really think of this, if you're running a business or you're going to work, and I wish people, again, this comes down to the communication, but I wish people would talk about this candidly and honestly. But if you got to think that you're going to get up today and go to work and not come home, that's absolutely horrible. Or you're going to get a disabling injury from the work you're doing.
Yeah.
Is it worth it? Well, the answer should be no, right? Like, right?
Yep, it should be.
People do it all the time. I think back of an incident that I was consulting with a company. It was in BC. The worker got electrocuted, and I won't give the scenario of what happened. We'll just say the worker got electrocuted. He lived, but he was missing his pinky toe. And, we go do this interview and WorkSafe BC, and everyone's all involved, and everyone pulls out the exact same policy and procedure for limit of approach to electrical, working around it. Policies looked great. Formal hazard assessments looked great. Everyone was trained, but it was the complacency aspect because, hey, look, we just do this all the time. We keep doing it. And we've signed off, we've checked, we've got all this stuff done.
Yeah.
But then when it comes to applying it, everyone went, right? Like, we had a statement from a supervisor on the site that said, it didn't look right, but I let them do it. And then the worker, who is, rightfully very pissed off, goes, I'm going to sue everyone. And unfortunately, I got to tell him, I said, well, that doesn't really work here, right? Like, this, it's not how it works, but it really doesn't work when you wrote a statement that said, it didn't look right, but I did it anyway. And there's so many of these types of scenarios too. And I go, one of the things that you should be educated on as an employer to your employees, you have a right and obligation to refuse unsafe work. I don't care what jurisdiction you are in every province, it's the same, right? And you should be telling people this all the time. It should be part of your orientation. It should be refresher training, depending on your industry. Some people are told every other week because they're going from site to site, and it's not so much to actually just say it, but educating people on how to refuse work and then how to have a candid conversation about it and be like, hey, it's not safe for me to do. I don't feel comfortable doing it. Okay, let's actually stop for a second and have a look, right? Like, is there something we've missed? Is there something we didn't train you on? or is it just you're not suited for this job, right? And being able to have that, and if we could enact that policy, a little more, lots of these things would go down. Right? Because people
would, yeah. You can't eliminate the human error totally. But
no.
I mean, you were talking about fatalities. If we even just talk of lost time days, I mean, the number of lost time claims by average, it's about 2.1 million lost time days in 2021. Think about the cost to employers, to employees, to the economy. So a lost time day to me, from a disability management standpoint, means the employee is not being supported in some way they need. Now, whether or not that support can be provided, because sometimes they just need time to heal after surgery, and that happens. And there's nothing you can do about that. You just need to recover. But in my opinion, in my experience, the vast majority of time lost days are because the employer doesn't understand what they can do or what they should do, or doesn't know their people. And that's where the disability management piece really shines, because we don't get involved in prevention, of course. We do some education on it, but we get involved when people are hurt. So for us to come in 4 months after someone's been off the whole time is so much harder to solve than if we could have been there on the first week and identified there's already these barriers maybe we can get rid of. And we can help reduce that $2.1 million time lost day number.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's proactive versus reactive.
Yeah.
Right. And it doesn't matter what process this is in a company. Reactive is always going to be way more expensive.
It always is. It's better to spend a little bit of money, have someone like our firm, like your firm, someone do some training, education, and they don't have to understand the whole system. I'm not going to teach someone about WCB. I've been doing it for 11 years now, and I don't still understand everything about WCB. It's always changing. But if you can teach them the steps they have to do as soon as they know something has occurred and who to talk to, those two things alone is going to save them so much frustration, get the employee way better care, and save the company a bunch of money. They just have to do it. And you're right, it's reactive, not proactive. It should be proactive.
But that's, we can take the disability case management aspect out of it. As a business owner or as a manager, how many things in your own business life have you maybe procrastinated longer than you should have? Or, said, I think I can figure this out as kind of a cost savings.
Yeah, no, I've never done that. That would be something I would do.
I'd still do that on half the things that
I may have done that yesterday, actually. I can think of one.
Right. And it's unfortunately because it's our human nature. You go, me personally, I go, I could get someone to write a blog. Man, I got education in my brain. I can write my own blog. But
you have the time or the resources that where you want to spend that's such a great argument too, is just because someone has the time to do it as a business owner, does that mean that's where you want to spend your time, or would your time better be spent on running the business so you can make more money and use part of that money to pay someone who all they do is that thing?
100%.
Yeah.
And, my prime example was, and I probably said this a lot too, is bookkeeping. I remember the first time I was consulting and my accountant said, here's a spreadsheet, fill it out. Bookkeeping's really easy.
Yeah.
On the second month of me not doing one thing that I was supposed to do, I went, nope, I need to pay a bookkeeper.
Yeah.
Right? This is not my forte. I don't like it. So, you just start piecing things off. But then again, you can get stuck in that. You should still educate yourself in it.
Yeah.
Right. If you don't know an absolute thing about it, you go, well, you're in trouble, because if that person leaves, you're scrambling. Right.
Yeah.
So business owners, there's a lot of stuff we don't know. Get experts for help. Still try to educate yourself on the rudimentary aspect of it.
Yeah. Fractional services are the business owner's best friend, whatever those fractional services are, because everyone needs different things. But taking the small things a business owner is not an expert at and getting an expert to do it is often quite affordable and so much better for the business.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, you're starting a brand new business, you have no cash, different options. But
you can, there's difference between lean lean management and then just ignoring everything.
Yeah, from the disability management side, I think business owners need to understand both HR and health and safety professionals have some knowledge of WCB and often believe that they can handle both. They can handle WCB. They can probably handle the 80% of the claims without any issues whatsoever. But it's like saying that someone who can keep an Excel spreadsheet of their home books is also someone who can handle a CRA audit.
Yeah.
And that's the discrepancy between the 80% of claims that are pretty simple and those 20% that just erupt. There's just no comparison. And it really, the benefits of having an expert are there.
Absolutely. And, you know, this is not taking away from any safety professional or HR.
No, of course not. No.
By any means, because, you know, I've worn those hats. I look at myself as a generalist, you know, like understanding full system implementation, training, mentoring, coaching, I can do. And we do it successfully over and over again with companies. But there are specialties, right? And, you know, as the generalist, usually when you start that out, you go, okay, I'm going to try bits here. I'm going to, you know, educate on more and more stuff. And then you start becoming specialists in certain aspects of the job, but it's usually not the whole thing. So having just the, you know, the awareness of yourself to know, hey, this is kind of over my head, I need to ask for help, is not a bad thing, right? Like it should be part of your day-to-day. If you go, hey, look, I need to consult with someone, regardless if it's a phone call and just trying to find that information or engaging into a professional service, right? Most people, and, you know, I don't want to speak for you, Geoff, but, you know, I've spoken to you numerous times where you're happy to just help educate people, right? Because you're like, hey, look, it doesn't take more than this. Let me just have a talk with this person. You know, we can get them over this. And then, you know, if it gets worse, then yeah, you should probably engage with me.
I'd rather have the call, educate them on the basic stuff. My goal is always to make employers confident enough they can handle the day-to-day stuff on their own, to educate them to that point, because then they know when they actually need services like what I offer. They can handle their day-to-day, but they know who to call when things get just too overwhelming. And that's what we specialize in. That's why we exist. We're very niche. That's all we do.
Well, and it's good. And, you know, there's the world needs niche expertise such as yourself, because again, everyone can't know all of it. So, you know, I'm going to wrap up here because we could talk for hours and hours on.
Yeah, we could just keep going. So.
But, you know, thank you, Geoff, for your time. There's a lot more that people could learn from you. So after this talk, I'm going to put your contact information. They can reach out to you on LinkedIn. Anyone can reach out to me through Goal Zero, and we can put them in touch with you as well. And, you know, I thank you for your time, because disability management is the one thing that, again, people don't really like talking about, but we need to educate people on. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me, Jackson. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too, sir. Have a good one. Talk soon.
You too. Bye.
All right, everyone. Thank you very much. And like I said, show notes will be there. I'll give you the contact information to get a hold of Geoff. WCB case management, super important to every business, no matter what your industry is. So if you need help, reach out. There's experts to help you, and there's education out there. Have a good day.